your pantry is lying to you, here's what will actually keep you alive. Walk into your kitchen right now. Open the cabinets. Count what's in there. Feels reassuring, doesn't it? It shouldn't. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people never consider until it's already too late. The majority of what sits in the average household pantry is not survival food. It's normal food wearing a disguise. There's a critical difference between the two, and that difference only becomes visible when the lights go out, the water stops flowing, and the stove goes cold. Disaster preparedness research shows that most households carry roughly 3 days of genuinely functional food. Not 3 days of calories. 3 days of food that can actually be opened, consumed, and converted into usable energy without power, running water, or any preparation time whatsoever. Everything else is conditional, and conditional food is nothing more than a liability dressed up as security. The rice is still there when the grid goes down. The pasta is still sitting on that shelf. But without heat and water, both of them are completely worthless. So the real question was never how much do I have? It was always how much of this still works when everything else doesn't. These are the 12 best canned foods to have before a serious disruption hits. Not ranked by what's popular, not ranked by what looks good on a shelf, ranked by what actually performs under genuine survival conditions. And the one sitting at the top of this list? Almost no one has it. 12. Canned soup. Most people glance at canned soup and immediately dismiss it. Too simple, too ordinary, not serious enough for a real emergency list. That instinct is completely wrong. Here's something disaster psychology consistently reveals. After 48 to 72 hours of significant disruption, the human brain doesn't collapse dramatically. It degrades quietly. Decision fatigue settles in without announcement. Tasks that once felt automatic, including figuring out what to eat, begin to feel unreasonably heavy. People stop skipping meals because food runs out. They stop eating because the mental effort of preparing anything feels like too much. Canned soup eliminates that problem entirely, not because it's the most nutritious item available, but because it removes every variable between a person and a meal. Open it, consume it, and you're done. 0 decisions required. One distinction determines whether it actually fulfills that function: ready-to-eat formulations versus condensed versions. Condensed soup still requires water, and in a water-restricted scenario, that single extra step makes it unreliable. Ready-to-eat soup requires nothing at all. Under genuine depletion, the gap between 1 step and 0 steps is sometimes the gap between eating and not eating. The high sodium content, which many people view as a nutritional flaw, becomes a functional advantage in a crisis. Stress and irregular eating accelerate electrolyte loss far faster than most people realize. That sodium helps maintain hydration balance and delays the kind of early physical collapse that has nothing to do with running low on calories. Key distinction: ready to eat only. Never condensed. 11. Canned chili. Most survival food solves only part of the nutritional equation. Beans deliver protein and carbohydrates but no fat. Vegetables offer micronutrients but no sustained energy. Nearly every item on a prepared shelf needs to be combined with something else to constitute a real meal, and combining requires thought, energy, and resources that deplete fast after the first few days. Canned chili is one of the only genuine exceptions. A single can delivers protein from meat, complex carbohydrates from beans, fat from the meat component, and enough flavor complexity to actually maintain appetite. That's 400 to 600 calories in a single container. 1 can, 1 complete meal, nothing else required. There's a second reason chili belongs this high on this list, and it has nothing to do with the nutrition facts. Around day 3, appetite begins to deteriorate, not from food scarcity, but because meals that are bland, repetitive, and texturally flat stop activating the appetite response properly. People shift from eating to sustain themselves to eating only because they have to. That shift carries real physiological consequences. Caloric intake drops, energy follows, and cognitive function declines shortly after. Chili interrupts that cycle. The texture, the layered flavor, the combination of components, the brain registers it as an actual meal rather than survival rations. That registration matters far more than the calorie count on the label. Key distinction: pull tab lid versions only. Without a can opener, a standard lid makes a complete meal completely inaccessible. 10. Canned beans. The standard way most people think about emergency food is through total caloric count. Eat enough, stay alive. That logic breaks down rapidly under real conditions. What actually matters is how long each meal keeps a person functional before the next one is needed, because every meal during a disruption costs something. Time. Fuel. Mental bandwidth. Fewer meals means fewer resources drained by the act of eating itself. That's the specific case for canned beans, and it's more precise than most people understand. Beans combine complex carbohydrates with plant-based protein. That combination produces a slower, more sustained energy release than refined carbohydrates or sugar. A single serving meaningfully extends the interval before the next meal is needed. Across several consecutive days, that extension compounds in ways that genuinely matter. The comparison to dried beans comes up often. Dried beans are cheaper per calorie, that part is accurate, but they require soaking, significant water, and a reliable fuel source to cook properly. Under disrupted conditions, those requirements frequently cannot be met. Canned beans carry none of those conditions. One detail almost everyone gets wrong: the liquid inside the can. Most people discard it automatically. That liquid contains soluble minerals and electrolytes leached from the beans during processing. Add it to soup, incorporate it into a preparation, or consume it directly. Nutrients recovered at no additional cost. Key distinction: rotate across types: black beans, chickpeas, kidney beans, and lentils. Nutritionally similar, but variety prevents the appetite fatigue that quietly reduces actual caloric intake after several days. 9. Canned chicken. Around day 3 or 4, something specific happens that almost no preparation guide anticipates. It isn't hunger. It isn't exhaustion. It's the absence of meat, not protein as a macronutrient, but the actual physical experience of eating something with real texture and substance. Soft foods satisfy caloric needs. They don't satisfy the neurological expectation built into human eating behavior over a very long time. That absence doesn't register as a caloric deficiency. It registers as a psychological one. And that distinction affects behavior in ways most people never anticipate. Canned chicken resolves this without refrigeration, without heat, and without preparation beyond opening the container. A standard can provide 40 to 50 grams of complete protein. Under elevated physical demand and poor recovery conditions, muscle degradation begins within days, not weeks. Adequate protein slows that process during precisely the period when physical capacity matters most. But canned chicken is better understood as a multiplier than a standalone item. Mixed into rice, it creates a protein-complete meal. Added to soup, it substantially increases nutritional density. Combined with canned tomatoes and beans, it becomes a full dish. It elevates almost everything it touches. Water-packed formulations are preferable. The neutral flavor integrates across more preparations without altering the base. Key distinction: once opened, consume the entire can or transfer immediately to a sealed container and use without delay. Without refrigeration, partial storage leads to rapid spoilage. 8. Canned tuna. Most emergency guides treat cognitive function as secondary, something to address after physical needs are handled. That's the wrong sequence entirely. The decisions made during a disruption about resource allocation, movement, and risk assessment determine outcomes more directly than caloric intake alone. Decision quality depends on brain function, and brain function depends on specific nutritional inputs that most canned foods simply don't provide. Most canned foods maintain the body. Canned tuna does something more specific. It supports the brain. Tuna contains a concentrated source of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DA and EPA, the long chain forms the human brain uses for cell membrane structure and neurotransmitter function. A deficit in these doesn't produce dramatic symptoms. It produces something far more insidious: gradual cognitive degradation, slower processing, reduced working memory, and impaired judgment under pressure. Under sustained stress, the timeline for that decline compresses significantly. The operational case is equally straightforward. No preparation required. No heat, no added water. A single can supplements 2 or 3 separate meals and integrates into virtually any base preparation: rice, pasta, soup, or crackers. Key distinction: water-packed offers maximum versatility. Oil-packed food delivers higher caloric density, a genuine advantage in cold conditions or during extended physical exertion. 7. Canned meat, beef, pork, potted meat. Ask most people what the body needs most during a prolonged crisis. They'll say protein, maybe carbohydrates. Almost no one says fat. That gap is significant. Carbohydrates produce energy quickly, protein maintains tissue integrity. But sustained physical output, especially in cold environments or during extended exertion without adequate rest, requires fat as a primary fuel source in a way that nothing else fully replicates. Fat delivers more than twice the caloric density per gram compared to either protein or carbohydrates. More importantly, it burns slowly and steadily, providing sustained output across long intervals without requiring additional intake. Canned meat delivers both protein and substantial fat in a single container with no cooking, no refrigeration, and no preparation. Caloric density per unit of storage volume is considerably higher than most alternatives. The high sodium content, which most people instinctively view as a drawback, is actually a functional advantage under these conditions. It supports fluid retention and electrolyte balance during periods of irregular eating and physical stress. That's not a flaw, it's a feature. Key distinction: pair with a carbohydrate source rather than eating alone. The combination of fat and carbohydrate produces more stable, extended energy output than either is consumed separately. 6. Canned tomatoes. By day 3 of eating from a stockpile, the problem most people encounter isn't shortage, it's refusal. The brain's appetite regulation system depends on sensory variety. When every meal looks, smells, and tastes identical, same texture, same salt profile, same flat absence of brightness, the appetite signal weakens. Eating stops being automatic. It becomes an act of willpower. And under sustained stress, willpower is not a renewable resource. Canned tomatoes solve that problem, and it's the most underestimated problem on this entire list. Acidity is one of the primary triggers for saliva production and appetite stimulation. Adding diced or crushed tomatoes to a flat bean or rice preparation fundamentally changes the sensory experience of that meal. That sounds minor. Across several consecutive days, it's what prevents caloric intake from declining to a level that starts affecting physical and cognitive performance. There's also a nutritional element most people overlook. The canning process increases the bioavailability of lycopene, a compound with antioxidant properties relevant to immune function under physical stress. Key distinction: store multiple formats. Crushed tomatoes are for sauces, diced for stews, and paste for concentrated flavor with minimal volume. Maximum utility, minimal footprint. 5. Canned vegetables. The human body doesn't signal micronutrient deficiency immediately. That's a biological feature. But in a crisis, it becomes a serious practical problem. Vitamins and minerals operate below the threshold of conscious awareness during normal function. Their absence doesn't announce itself with obvious symptoms early on. It shows up gradually: slower recovery from physical exertion, reduced immune responsiveness, and declining tissue repair. By the time those symptoms become identifiable, the deficit has been compounding for days. This is the gap in nearly every calorie-focused stockpile, and it's exactly what canned vegetables fill. Green beans provide fiber and vitamin K. Corn provides B vitamins and carbohydrates. Spinach provides iron and folate. No single type covers the full micronutrient range the body needs under sustained stress, which means rotating across types is a functional requirement, not a preference. One detail almost everyone ignores: the liquid inside the can. It contains water-soluble vitamins and minerals leached during processing. Add it to soup, incorporate it into a stew, or drink it directly. Nutrients recovered at zero additional cost. Key distinction: choose low-sodium formulations where available. You can always add salt at consumption. You cannot remove it once it's in the can. 4. Sweetened condensed milk. Most emergency food planning makes one assumption so basic that almost nobody questions it: that the person will be willing and physically capable of eating solid food. That assumption breaks down more often than expected. Sustained nausea from stress, extreme fatigue, gastrointestinal disruption from sudden dietary changes, any of these can create a state where solid food becomes genuinely difficult to consume. Not because it's unavailable, but because the body won't cooperate. When that happens, the rest of the stockpile becomes temporarily useless. Sweetened condensed milk exists precisely for that scenario. A single standard can deliver over 1,000 calories in a liquid format that's easy to consume, easy to digest, and requires zero preparation. For someone in a state of acute nausea or severe depletion, it provides a pathway to caloric intake that solid food simply cannot. Sweetness is also the taste profile most consistently associated with comfort and psychological safety in human neurological conditioning. Under acute stress, a small amount produces a measurable reduction in perceived threat. That's a physiological response with real functional value. Key distinction: this is not a meal replacement, it's an activation tool, something to restore minimal function, immediately followed by more complete nutrition. 3. Canned pumpkin. Most people think about survival nutrition in terms of calories, protein, and vitamins. What almost no one accounts for is the third system that quietly begins failing, and when it does, it undermines everything else. Digestion. The foods most commonly stockpiled share a specific profile: dense, dry, and very low in fiber. White rice, crackers, pasta, canned meat, processed beans, consumed over multiple consecutive days without a fiber source, the digestive system slows. Absorption efficiency drops. Physical discomfort increases. The desire to eat diminishes with it. This creates a compounding problem that accelerates the exact nutritional decline the stockpile was built to prevent. Canned pumpkin is the most effective and most overlooked solution to this problem. But the label distinction matters enormously, and most people get it wrong. 100% pure pumpkin puree contains nothing but pumpkin. Pumpkin pie filling contains sugar, spices, and sodium, none of which serve the digestive function needed. Buying the wrong product makes this item completely useless for its intended purpose. The right product delivers meaningful dietary fiber in a gentle, non-irritating form. It also provides a concentrated source of beta-carotene, which the body converts to vitamin A, supporting immune function, skin barrier integrity, and mucosal health. Key distinction: read every label. Pure pumpkin puree only. Mix into other preparations rather than eating alone. 2. Evaporated milk. There's a type of breakdown in prolonged crisis scenarios that most survival guides completely ignore. It has nothing to do with calories or physical safety. It's the loss of routine. Morning coffee. A recognizable breakfast. A meal that actually feels like a meal. These small rituals serve a function far beyond comfort. They anchor the psychological sense that basic order still exists. They mark time. They signal to the nervous system that things remain manageable. When those anchors disappear suddenly and entirely, the effect on morale and cognitive function is measurable, and it happens faster than most people anticipate. Evaporated milk is one of the few stockpile items that can partially preserve those anchors. Diluted with water in a 1:1 ratio, it produces a liquid nutritionally and texturally close to whole milk. Coffee becomes recognizable again. Porridge takes on a familiar consistency. Meals built entirely from canned goods retain something that feels like normalcy. Unlike sweetened condensed milk, evaporated milk contains no added sugar. It doesn't spike blood glucose. It doesn't create a thirst response. It integrates neutrally into almost any preparation, making it far more versatile as a daily use item. It also provides calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin D, nutrients supporting skeletal integrity and muscle function. Under sustained physical stress, declining calcium status builds slowly and compounds across days without announcing itself. Key distinction: store it for the preservation of routine. Long shelf life, no refrigeration required, and one of the highest utility to storage space ratios on this entire list. 1. Canned sardines. If this entire list comes down to a single principle, it's this: in a crisis, functional value is not the same as perceived value. What people stockpile reflects what they enjoy under normal conditions. What actually sustains them under disrupted conditions is determined by an entirely different set of criteria. No item illustrates that gap more clearly than canned sardines. They're not popular. They're not the first thing most people reach for. But in terms of nutritional completeness per unit volume, zero prep readiness, and performance across the widest range of conditions, sardines represent the highest functional value of anything in this category. And it's not particularly close. Here's what a single small can actually contains: complete protein, long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, calcium from the fully edible soft bones, phosphorus, vitamin D, and meaningful fat. That is a complete macronutrient and micronutrient profile in one container. No combining required, no supplementation needed. Open the can, and every major biological need is at least partially addressed simultaneously. The omega-3 content deserves particular attention. DA and EPA are not produced efficiently by the human body. They must come from dietary sources. Under sustained stress, when cognitive demands are elevated and every decision carries real consequences, maintaining adequate omega-3 status directly supports the neurological function required to navigate a crisis effectively. Sardines are among the most concentrated shelf-stable sources available anywhere. The bones, softened completely by the canning process and fully edible, provide calcium that requires zero preparation and zero additional resources. Most people remove them. That's a mistake. Don't discard the oil in the can either. It contains concentrated fat-soluble nutrients and significant caloric density. Use it with the fish. Dress crackers or rice with it, discard it, and you're discarding a resource you cannot afford to waste. Portability adds one final advantage. Sardine cans are among the smallest and lightest in the entire canned food category. A complete nutritional profile fits in a jacket pocket. In any scenario requiring movement or relocation, that is an operational advantage nothing else on this list can match. Key distinction: stock both oil-packed and water-packed. Never discard the oil. Leave the bones in. This is the only item on this list that functions as a complete nutritional solution with nothing added. Here's the only measure that actually matters when evaluating a stockpile. Look at what you have stored right now. Pick up each item. Ask one question: can this be opened and consumed immediately without any additional input in a way that provides meaningful nutritional value? If yes, it belongs. If the answer requires a condition, if I have water, if I have power, if I have time, then it isn't survival food. It's normal food occupying space that was meant for something far more reliable. The average pantry fails that test badly. Most of what sits behind those cabinet doors is conditional. The rice is conditional. The pasta is conditional. The dried lentils are conditional. None of them function without the infrastructure that, in a real disruption, is exactly what disappears first. The 12 items on this list share one defining characteristic: none of them depend on that infrastructure. Each one can be opened and consumed right now, without heat, without running water, without a working kitchen, without mental clarity, and without time. That's not a small distinction. That's the entire distinction. Here's the only action that matters now. Pick 3 items from this list. 3. This week, when you're already at the store, add them to your cart. Next week, 3 more. Within a month, you've built something that actually functions, not a pantry that merely looks prepared, but one that holds up when conditions stop cooperating. And here's the part most people never consider. Even if nothing serious ever happens, you haven't lost a single thing. This is food you're going to eat regardless. You're simply buying it now, on your own schedule, rather than later under circumstances you don't control. That's not a prepper mindset. That's just clearer thinking than most people apply to something that genuinely matters. Your pantry looked reassuring at the start of this. Now you know exactly how much of that reassurance was real, and more importantly, what to do about it. The question was never whether you have food stored. It was always whether that food still works when everything else doesn't. Now you have your answer.